General Hospital spoilers for Wednesday, August 20th teased that Alexis had defended high-profile cases before. She had taken on criminals, corporations, and political elites who had far more power than they deserved and far fewer morals than the law required. But nothing prepared her for the moment Liz stepped into her office, carrying a weight that even silence couldn't conceal. Liz was visibly distressed, her usually composed demeanor unraveling at the edges. What she brought to Alexis wasn't just a legal issue, it was a plea wrapped in secrecy, betrayal, and a tangle of consequences far beyond either of their expectations. At first, Alexis assumed it was a custody matter or a workplace issue. She'd seen Liz struggle before, like so many others in Port Charles, trying to hold her world together with fragile seams. But this time, it wasn't about her children or the hospital. This time, Liz was carrying something darker, something that could detonate everything around her. Alexis listened carefully, pen poised but unmoving. As Liz began to speak, her voice trembled as she recounted strange occurrences at General Hospital, a pattern of manipulation and cover-ups, all tied back to a shadow that now loomed over her life. Drew. Once viewed as a stable ally, Drew had started acting erratically, moving pieces behind the scenes, manipulating situations with alarming precision. And what terrified Liz most was that he seemed to be targeting her, covertly, silently, but unmistakably. Alexis didn't want to believe it. She had stood beside Drew on more than one battlefield. They had fought for truth, for family, even for redemption. But people change. Sometimes slowly, sometimes with the violence of a snapped wire. Drew's dissent had been masked well, behind charm, control, and calculated moves, but to Liz, the cracks were showing. She had watched him become colder, more withdrawn, his eyes no longer seeing people but only outcomes. And now she feared she was next in a string of victims. Taking the case was not a legal decision for Alexis, it was a moral one. She could have declined. She could have told Liz to go to another lawyer, to seek protection elsewhere. But Alexis had learned the hard way that when people like Drew went unchecked, the damage spread like wildfire. So she accepted, knowing full well that in doing so, she was crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Almost immediately, strange things began to happen. Her office phone would ring, and no one would speak. Files went missing. Conversations she thought were private felt somehow leaked. Alexis wasn't paranoid. She knew the signs of being watched, of being tracked. And every instinct in her screamed that this wasn't just Drew's influence, it was his orchestration. And then came the confrontation. Drew, no longer bothering to hide behind diplomacy, came to see her, not as a friend, not as a colleague, but as a threat. Their exchange was tense, cold, and painfully revealing. Drew didn't deny his actions, he simply justified them. He talked about protecting what mattered, about eliminating weak links, and about doing what had to be done, no matter the cost. Alexis realized then that Drew wasn't just spiraling, he was calculating. Ruthless. And if he saw her as an obstacle, he wouldn't hesitate to remove her. Yet what unsettled her most wasn't Drew's aggression. It was how isolated she suddenly felt. Curtis, who had once supported her through turbulent times, began to distance himself. She noticed his reluctance to return calls, his vague responses, the careful way he avoided discussing anything related to Drew. Whether it was fear, loyalty, or something else, Alexis didn't know. But it meant one thing, she was alone in this fight. And Drew knew it. Still, Alexis refused to back down. She began digging deeper into Liz's claims, uncovering traces of hospital records being scrubbed, security footage vanishing without notice, and internal memos rewritten in the dead of night. Someone was covering tracks, and doing it well. Her pursuit of truth only intensified the danger. At night, she'd hear footsteps outside her house. Anonymous letters warned her to drop it while she still could. One morning, her car alarm blared at 5 a.m., the locks tampered with. Alexis knew she was being hunted, not by a wild animal, but by someone far more methodical. And yet she kept going. Because the moment she let fear dictate her actions, she would lose. Not just the case, but her integrity. Her purpose. The very things that had rebuilt her after years of personal collapse. She reached out to Sam, hoping for some support. Sam tried to help, but even she couldn't deny the danger closing in around them. "Be careful," Sam whispered before hanging up. "Drew isn't who he used to be." And Alexis believed it. The man now maneuvering through Port Charles wasn't just playing a game of power, he was willing to destroy anyone who stood in his way. Liz had been the first to sense it. Alexis was the first to act. Now, they were both targets. And Alexis had to ask herself, how far was she willing to go to stop a man who used to be her ally? How many bridges was she willing to burn? And in a town where loyalty shifted like sand and truth was a rare commodity, could justice still be served? Each step Alexis took brought her closer to a confrontation she wasn't sure she would survive. But if she was going down, she was going down fighting. Because Port Charles deserved better. Liz deserved better. And maybe, just maybe, Alexis deserved the redemption that only comes from standing your ground, no matter who's coming for you. Anna is beginning to piece together a chilling theory, one that suggests the rot inside the WSB goes far deeper than anyone expected. What began as whispers of misinformation has now evolved into a disturbing pattern of betrayal, and Anna suspects that someone from within the agency has been manipulating intelligence, distorting reports, and feeding misleading data to the wrong hands. Her theory grows darker when she zeroes in on Colette, once a trusted associate, who may have been covertly reporting false or altered information regarding Jocelyn and Vaughn's recent movements. If true, this isn't just a breach of protocol, it's the groundwork for something far more catastrophic. The implications are terrifying. Jocelyn and Vaughn believed they were operating within secure perimeters, under the protection of WSB-sanctioned oversight. But Anna now fears that someone within the agency deliberately compromised their positions, possibly leading Vaughn directly into a trap he could not survive. His death, initially explained as a tragic loss in the field, may in fact have been orchestrated. Anna, having worked with Vaughn and knowing his field acumen, refuses to believe he made a careless mistake. Someone planned this. Someone wanted him dead. And now, with Jocelyn still active in the field and unaware of the invisible noose tightening around her, Anna knows time is running out. Internal data logs have been tampered with. Surveillance has gone dark in key moments. Clearance orders are being expedited with no paper trail. Every clue points toward a betrayal so insidious it could unravel the entire network of WSB's global operatives. And in the heart of it, Colette, the agent who once swore to protect lives. Now possibly the architect of their destruction. Anna's concern deepens when she uncovers encrypted communications suggesting that someone higher up may be sanctioning these adjustments from within. Disguising sabotage as restructuring. But what's the endgame? Why target Jocelyn and Vaughn? Why now? The timing is too precise, the cover-up's too clean. Anna suspects a hidden agenda, perhaps even an internal purge designed to silence those who've seen too much or those who still stand by old principles. For Anna, the fear is no longer abstract. If this is true, the WSB as she knew it is gone, corrupted from the top down. Worse still, Jocelyn is walking blindly through enemy territory. Unaware that every move she makes may be watched by someone who wants her eliminated. Vaughn's death was likely the first domino to fall. Jocelyn could be the next. This isn't merely a crisis of intelligence failure, it's a systemic betrayal, a dismantling of trust. And the dawning of a new and terrifying phase of espionage where the enemy isn't outside the gates, but seated at the table. And unless Anna can prove it before another agent dies, the fallout will be unlike anything Port Charles has ever seen. A reckoning is coming, and this time, it won't be a war of ideologies, it will be a massacre. Disguised in silence and sanctioned by shadows. Emma had reached her breaking point. The walls around her, both literal and figurative, were closing in faster than she could steady herself. Since Vaughn's disappearance, since the whispers about surveillance and encrypted files began to circulate, she had known something was terribly wrong. But it wasn't until she accessed Vaughn's backup files, hidden behind layers of misleading folders and fake academic reports, that the full scale of the operation became clear. Dalton, once respected and even admired in certain academic and intelligence circles, had orchestrated a chilling campaign of manipulation and control. Emma found surveillance images, timelines, names, and phrases that only meant something if one had lived within the corridors of power in Port Charles. And now, all of it pointed back at her. She had become a liability to them, whoever they were, and the danger was no longer theoretical. They knew her face. They tracked her movements. They had flagged her as a threat. In the middle of this storm, she turned to the only person who hadn't been compromised by past allegiances or buried in years of betrayal, Gio. He was still relatively new to Port Charles politics. Emotionally untethered to the legacy feuds and factional infighting that plagued so many others. But more importantly, Gio had proven himself to be someone who wouldn't look away. Emma told him everything, not just the obvious threats, but the gut feelings, the patterns, the discrepancies in faculty reports and email timestamps. And he listened. Without disbelief. Without judgment. Without fear. That moment solidified their pact, not just as friends but as co-conspirators in a fight they hadn't asked for but could no longer avoid. As they combed through the files, they began to identify markers, operational code names, dropped phrases in casual conversations, false credentials embedded in university archives. Colette's name appeared again and again in connection to flagged reports. Digital metadata that placed her login credentials at critical junctions in the file system at times that should have been impossible. But what chilled them most was the folder labeled contingency. Inside were protocols to initiate a full sweep if any of the targets, Vaughn, Jocelyn, or Emma, began interfering with the operational chain. Under Emma. The last entry was timestamped just 2 days before Vaughn vanished. Despite everything, Emma didn't allow fear to eclipse her determination. If anything, it hardened into something far more focused. She and Gio created decoys, digital breadcrumbs that would redirect watchers to false leads while they followed the real trail deeper into the network. It was exhausting work. Emotionally grueling. But for every dead end, they found another piece of the puzzle. A map of communication towers near the lake house. A shell company used to funnel money to a local clinic with ties to Dalton's former research. A list of deleted student transcripts, including Vaughn's. Hidden under the guise of administrative cleanup. These weren't isolated anomalies, they were part of something much larger. Something systematic. What Emma hadn't prepared for was how personal it would become. Her name wasn't just on the target list. There were notes, psychological evaluations. Predictions of how she might respond under pressure. References to her family, to Robin, to Patrick. Someone had studied her. Profiled her. Turned her life into a calculated risk on a government flowchart. And now, she was being managed like an unstable asset. Emma knew time was running out. Dalton had to be confronted. Who had once been a bystander in the city's long line of conspiracies and cover-ups, was now deeply entrenched in the crossfire. They moved quickly. Changed locations every night. Used burner devices. Re-encrypted every file twice. They lived in caffeine and adrenaline, never certain who might be watching or listening. Each day brought new paranoia but also deeper clarity. What started as a gut suspicion had evolved into a dangerous game of preemptive strategy, and Emma was at the center of it. She had once believed the line between right and wrong was clear. But now, every move they made required bending rules, hiding truths, and risking lives. The question that haunted her most wasn't whether she would survive it. It was whether she could still look her mother in the eye when it was over. Because if Anna had known about any of this, and there were signs she might have, it meant the betrayal wasn't just academic. It was familial. But Emma couldn't stop now. Not with Vaughn still missing. Not with Dalton's operation accelerating. Not with Geo now walking beside her, just as exposed and just as determined. They had no illusions of grandeur. No fantasies of being hailed as heroes. What they had was necessity. A compulsion to do what no one else seemed willing to do. And if they failed, they would do so knowing they had chosen to resist rather than remain silent. Because resistance, no matter how small, was a form of survival. And for Emma, in this moment, survival meant uncovering the truth, dismantling the machine built to erase it, and confronting whatever shadows still remained, inside Dalton, inside the WSB, and perhaps even inside her own family. Some believe he's trying to shield his brother from a false accusation. Others suspect he's doing it to protect himself. And then comes the news, possibly a new piece of evidence, a sighting. Or a witness that contradicts everything Lucas has claimed. It's the kind of revelation that could unravel every lie, every justification, every desperate plea he's made. With it, the already tense situation explodes into chaos. Those who trusted Lucas begin to turn on him. Law enforcement shifts its gaze, no longer convinced of his innocence in the grander scheme of things. And chillingly strategic. It's not just that she's thinking differently, it's that she's thinking against him. The tone of their home has changed. Every conversation feels like a test. Every interaction carries the threat of confrontation, and Drew can feel the ground beneath him becoming increasingly unstable. There is an emotional war brewing. And the stakes are higher than either of them ever expected. For Drew, this isn't just a battle of opinions. It's an existential threat to his authority, his influence, and his identity as a father. He tries to regain control, but the more forceful he becomes, the more Scout pulls away. The darkness that's growing between them is no longer a matter of misunderstandings, it's a matter of ideology. That she's planning. That she sees him not as someone to listen to, but as someone to overcome. And with every cold glance she gives, with every sharp word she utters, Drew feels himself losing the child he once knew. He's not just furious, he's afraid. Because the person Scout is becoming might not be someone he can reach, reason with, or redeem. And in that realization, Drew faces a new truth. The darkness surrounding them isn't coming from the outside. It's growing from within their own fractured family. Lulu was left utterly shaken when Rocco, her own son, stood before her and, with a chilling finality in his voice, declared that he no longer felt the bond of mother and child between them. It wasn't a moment born from impulsive emotion, it was the culmination of something darker, more deliberate, a shift in his heart that Lulu hadn't seen coming. Her breath caught in her chest. This rejection felt like the cruelest blow of all. But beneath Rocco's cold declaration lies the insidious influence of Liesel Albrecht, whose quiet manipulations have gradually taken root in the boy's mind. Liesel, ever strategic and fueled by her own twisted sense of justice, had found a way to insert herself into Rocco's emotional orbit during the months Lulu had been absent or recovering. She didn't need to say much, just enough to plant seeds of doubt. Paint Lulu as weak, absent, unreliable. Over time, Liesel became a source of strength for Rocco, someone he could look to, confide in, and depend on while his mother battled the chaos of her own recovery. And slowly, without anyone noticing, the emotional center of his world shifted. Now, as Lulu tries to reach her son, she's met with a wall of silence, defensiveness, and even hostility. Her presence, once a source of comfort, now triggers discomfort. Every attempt at reconnecting is met with deflection or disdain. Rocco doesn't want to talk, doesn't want to be touched, doesn't want to hear her version of anything. The light in his eyes when he used to see her, gone. And in its place, a quiet storm fueled by resentment and fed by Liesel's subtle, relentless influence. This isn't just a broken relationship, it's a psychological war zone. Lulu begins to realize that what she's facing isn't mere teenage rebellion, it's a complete reprogramming of her child's perception. It's as if the bond they once shared has been erased and rewritten by someone who knew exactly how to exploit Rocco's vulnerability and Lulu's weakest moments. The fear gripping Lulu isn't just about losing her son, it's about losing the fight for his soul. And as the tension rises, Lulu isn't the only one beginning to unravel. Those around her, Dante, Laura, even Kevin, start noticing the signs that something isn't right. But the damage has already been done. Liesel's fingerprints are all over this emotional sabotage. But proving it is another story entirely. The deeper Lulu digs, the more she uncovers about how calculated this estrangement really is. And with each passing day, the path back to Rocco becomes more obscured by bitterness, confusion, and the scars of absence. What started as a fragile reconnection after Lulu's time away has now become a full-blown emotional disaster. The child she once cradled in her arms now looks at her with eyes that no longer see her as Mom. And in that devastation lies the beginning of a new crisis, one that may not only destroy a mother-son relationship, but could tear open the very fabric of what's left of Lulu's identity. Liesel hasn't just taken Rocco's trust, she's weaponized it. And now Lulu must prepare for a war she never imagined she'd have to fight, one for the heart of her own son.